We are entering the age of the Great Transition. Old tribal alliances are crumbling into the dust, replaced by the ruthless machinery of rising nation-states. Through this chaos walks the Buddha, preaching that all things, even nations, are impermanent. If you look at this map, it seems stable. You see borders, rivers, and the solid lines of nation-states. But maps are dangerous things because they lie to us about safety. The Shakyas believed that their little patch of gold on the map was permanent. They thought their system of voting and talking would prevent them from the iron and fire of their neighbors. They didn't realize that on a map, democracy looks exactly like a target. Let's first understand the heartbeat of that democracy, because you will be amazed that such a system existed nearly 2,500 years ago, 25 centuries before the first parliament convened in Westminster, before the Roman Senate debated in marble halls. The Shakya perfected something remarkable, a formal procedure for making decisions together. The Shakyas were not ruled by a king. They were a Ganasangha, an aristocratic republic where power resided not in one man, but in an assembly of clan heads. 500 Rajan, voting members, each representing a warrior family. The word Raja here didn't mean king. It meant something closer to one who has a voice. They gathered in the Sandhakara, literally the group house, a constitutional space where the fate of the clan was decided through collective deliberation. At the four corners sat the Amach, ministers who recorded every speech, comparing notes afterward to ensure nothing was forgotten or misrepresented. At the head sat the Ganapati, the presiding officer, not a hereditary position, elected. His job was not to rule but to facilitate, and facilitation required a very specific procedure. Every decision in the Santagara followed 6 stages. Miss one and the decision wasn't violent. Sannipata, the convening. When a matter required decision, drums announced the assembly. The Ganapurak, literally the quorum filler, went door to door to ensuring enough members would attend. No quorum, no valid decisions. It was that simple. Nyati, the formal motion. The presiding officer would rise and speak the ritual opening. Sunato me bhante sangha. Let the venerable assembly hear me. What followed was the matter at hand, stated clearly, completely, without presuming an outcome. Anusavana, the proclamation. Once stated, the motion was proclaimed 3 times. He to whom this is agreeable should remain silent. He to whom it is not agreeable should speak. Tunne bhava, silence as consent. If after the 3rd proclamation no one spoke, then silence meant agreement. Therefore, by silence, thus I understand it. This was the goal. Samagga Sangha, the harmonious assembly. Not unanimous agreement through conformity, but shared understanding through deliberation, so thorough that even objections dissolved naturally. Vivada, deliberation. If any member objected after the 1st or 2nd proclamation, debates began. Factions might form, what the text called dvandva, rival positions. The assembly talked until the objector was persuaded, or the motion was modified, or neither side would yield. Only when deliberation failed, did the Shakyas vote. Salaka, the wooden ballot stick. A figure called the Salaka Gahapaka, chosen solely for the reputation for honesty, would collect the votes. 3 methods existed. Secret ballot, members placed marked sticks in covered vessel. No one knew how anyone else voted. Vivataka, the whispered vote, murmured into collector's ear. The decision by majority was called Yebhyasika, acting by the greater number. But here's what's crucial. Voting was considered a failure. If you needed to count heads, it meant the community remained divided. The minority hadn't been persuaded, the underlying disagreement hadn't been resolved. The Shakyas knew that a vote could determine an outcome, but only Tunne Bhava, only true consensus could create legitimacy. Listen to the rhythm of the debate. It sounds civilized, doesn't it? The measured tones, the procedural motions, the silence that means consent. But underneath the politeness, there's a dangerous kind of arrogance at work here. They aren't just governing, they are congratulating themselves on being untouchable, on having invented something the world has never seen. They believed their blood was purer, their laws were smarter, their procedures more sophisticated than the crude kings surrounding them. They fell in love with the sound of their own voices, deaf to the wolves. History rarely turns on a grand philosophy. Usually it turns on a petty mistake, a border dispute, a few insults traded between guards, a misunderstanding over water rights. It should have been diplomatic footnote filed away in a dusty scroll, forgotten by the next generation. But when you are looking for a fight, any spark is enough to burn down a forest. The Shakyas saw a nuisance, but their enemies saw an opportunity. This is the moment the clock started ticking towards the end. Now we meet the man who was watching that clock. We need to understand how he got there. King Pasenadi of Kosala, powerful, prosperous, and by his own admission, too fond of his meals. He ruled from Savatthi, overlooking the Asiravati river, a man who had everything a king could want, except one thing. He wanted to connect himself to the Buddha family, to the Shakyas, to something pure. So he asked for a Shakya bride, a union of kingdoms, an honor he thought they would welcome. In Kapilavastu, the council debated the request. 500 voices, 500 opinions. They couldn't refuse their overlord outright. That would be dangerous. So they agreed, but not honestly. They sent him a girl, born of a slave and a master, presented her as pure-blooded, thought they were being clever, thought they would never get caught. They washed the throne where Pasenadi sat with milk. Pasenadi married her, loved her even. She bore him a son. They named him Virudhaka. Years passed, the boy grew, trained with swords, stood beside his father. And then, one day someone talked. The truth came out. Virudhaka learned that his mother was not a princess. She was a servant, sent as a mockery. The Shakya hadn't just insulted his father. They had insulted his existence, his right to be king, his mother's blood, every moment of his life, suddenly a lie they had written. Pasenadi let it go, said nothing, did nothing. Perhaps he hoped it would fade. But shame doesn't fade, it waits. The decision was already made. The Shakyas thought they were facing a political problem. They didn't realize they were standing in front of a 40-year-old wound. And wounds like that don't negotiate. The Shakyas assumed their neighbors would rush in to save the only democracy in the region. But look at how quickly ideals crumble when money is put on the table. Virudhaka didn't just bring an army. He brought lower taxes, trade deals, promises of prosperity. One by one, the neighboring republics did the math and closed their doors. Suddenly, the Shakyas weren't the leaders of coalition anymore. They were alone in a room and the lights were out. This is what it looks like when two different realities collide in one room. Mahajanapada, the man of words, the product of 500 years of debate, thinks he can negotiate a middle ground, find a compromise, discover the wording that will satisfy everyone. The ambassador, the man of force, knows there is nothing to discuss but the terms of surrender. You can see the confusion in Mahanama's eyes. He's trying to play chess while his opponent is burning the board. It is the classic tragedy of the intellectual facing the brute. He thinks he can talk his way out of a massacre. He said no. And in that moment, he probably felt very brave. It's a seductive thing to stand on principle when you are being threatened, to hold your ground, to refuse to bend. By refusing to bend, he guaranteed that his people would break. He walked out of that room feeling righteous, feeling like he had defended the honor of the Shakya. He didn't know he had just signed the death warrant for everyone he loved. The political world fails you. You have to go somewhere else. Mahajanapada left the shouting of the city and went into the silence of the forest, past the gates of Kapilavastu, past the fields, into the wild. Listen to the shift in the wind here. We are moving from the immediate crisis to the eternal view, from the urgency of the clock to the patience of the trees. The city noise fades, the birds begin, the world breathes differently here. He wasn't looking for a military strategy anymore. He was looking for a reason to hope that this wasn't the end. He found the Buddha in a forest clearing. The answer Mahajanapada got was not what he had wanted to hear. Do not be the aggressor, the Buddha said, but protect what is yours. It sounded like wisdom, but to a desperate man, it felt like a riddle. The Buddha sees the long arc of karma, that every action has a reaction, and that reaction may take lifetimes to return. But Mahanama is living in the short term, where actions have consequences in blood. Tomorrow, he took a spiritual truth and tried to turn it into a political tactic. And that's when things started to go very wrong. This is where the analytical mind finally snaps under pressure. The council took the Buddha's riddle and twisted it until it sounded like safety. They convinced themselves that opening the gates wasn't surrender, it was peace. That welcoming the army was weakness, it was enlightenment. They voted on their own destruction, thinking that they were being wise. It is terrifying to watch smart people use logic to talk themselves into a trap. They weren't listening to the enemy, they were only listening to each other, the echo chamber of their own pride. I want you to just look at this image for a moment. This is the sound of a civilization making its final mistake. It is heavy and slow and absolutely irreversible. They opened the gates expecting a handshake, expecting mercy, expecting that their ancient lineage and democratic traditions would command respect. They didn't realize they were opening the door to the wolf. The massacre didn't happen in slow motion. It happened at the speed of hate. There was no negotiation, no pause, no moment of realization. Virudhaka didn't want their surrender. He wanted their extinction. Every man, woman, child who carried that bloodline. The speed of the violence overwhelmed the slowness of their democracy. In seconds, the library of their laws was ash. The halls of their debate were rubble. The voices of the council were silenced forever. And all that was left was the fire. We are back with the two men, but the power has shifted completely. Mahanama is on his knees, begging not for the city is already lost. Begging just for the people running away, the survivors streaming through the gates. Let them flee, he says, for as long as I can hold my breath underwater. It seems like such a small, pathetic bargaining chip. A few moments of air. What can that possibly buy? But Virudhaka smiles, because he knows the limit of human lungs. He knows that no man can hold his breath long enough to save a nation. He thinks he's granting a few minutes of mercy before the slaughter resumes. But here, it becomes the final battleground. Mahanama steps into the pool and the noise of the army fades away. The screams, the fires, the laughter of the king, all of it dissolves into the silence of the water. He knows he cannot hold his breath long enough to save them all. The math is simple. His lungs will fail, the people will die. So he makes a choice that changes the physics of the deal. He isn't planning to come back up. He is trading his life for the thousands fleeing through the gates. He dives down to the bottom and finds the root of an old tree. He ties his hair to the roots, anchoring himself to the earth, to the land of his ancestors, to the home that can no longer protect him. It is a quiet, desperate, physical act of resistance. Above him, the king waits, checking the time, growing impatient, wondering how long a man can possibly hold his breath. Below him, a man drowns himself on purpose. It is the ultimate victory of the spirit over the body. Eventually, the king realizes a trick, but it was too late. The people had escaped, vanishing into the hills, into the history books, into the stories they would tell their children about the man who drowned to save them. But the city itself, the city was a graveyard. The republic was dead, its council silent, its debates ended, 500 voices reduced to nothing. The rigid mind of the state had broken, but the fluid spirit of the people had flowed away to survive. The survivors asked the Buddha the question we all ask: why us? Why did this happen? What did we do wrong? The Buddha didn't talk about politics or strategy or the mistakes of the council. He talked about deep time. He told them of a village generations ago that poisoned a river to catch fish, killed everything in the water for a single meal. You were the villagers, he said, and the fish have returned as an army. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't political miscalculation. It was debt coming due. Violence is an echo, and it can take centuries to return to the source. And the cycle didn't stop there. Virudhaka burned the city, and soon after, fire took him too. Killed in his own sleep by his own son, or struck by lightning. The stories differ, but the meaning is the same. The victor and the victim were consumed by the same energy. Now here, where the story ends. The moral is neatly packaged, the tragedy of the Shakya, the dangers of pride, the wheel of karma. But that's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you this because we keep making the same mistake. Look around, every generation, somewhere in the world, someone draws up a constitution, designs the perfect system, builds the elegant machinery of democracy, and every generation they act as if the machine will run itself. But the Shakya had the most sophisticated democratic process the ancient world has ever seen, and it didn't save them. Democracy is not plug and play. It doesn't run on procedures, it runs on people. Virudhaka didn't destroy the Shakya Republic. The Shakya destroyed the Shakya Republic. Virudhaka just provided the fire. And here's the part that is worrying. The same forces that killed them are alive in every democracy today. The same arrogance, the same echo chambers, the same belief that our system is too sophisticated to fail, that our debates are too civilized to end in fire. But systems don't fail because the machinery breaks. Systems fail because people break. Because one man's wounded pride becomes a nation's war. Because a council chooses comfort over clarity. Because we forget that the most elegant constitution in the world is just paper, unless human beings choose to be worthy of it. The Buddha told them the truth. Violence is an echo, it returns. And the sacrifice, that echoes too. One man who understood that systems don't save people. People save people. Democracy is not something you have, it is something you do every day. The seats are empty now, the debates are over, but the question isn't buried with them. Will we listen before the wolf arrives? Or we will, too, fall in love with the sound of our own voices. And the only thing that survives is what we choose to become.